Our next set of speakers, Ms. Annie McKAY and Mr. Wilson, will join us at the podium.
I can recognize Anita Judd Jenkins' whoop anywhere. I think we had some slide technical difficulties when we walked in, so I think that those are going to be coming up in just a second. I want to start certainly by thanking Women for Kansas, and I also want to acknowledge the role that Women for Kansas and the steering committee and the chapters across the state played in that wave in 2016, and the importance of the role that you will play in 2018. And to really reflect in that and the power that we built and the power that we will need to keep building beyond 18. We hear a lot about, and we heard from Davis and Steve about some of the actions. And when I look back and think about before Brownback, before extremism took grip in this state, it's more than once a year that we need to show up, right? We need to get into eggs and issues on Saturdays. We need to cultivate a pipeline of people, young people, to run for city councils and school boards and all of those things. And so we need to think that long game. And that's also what I encourage us really to sort of marinate in. The strength of our state is not in an every 2-year election cycle, but how are we building for the next 10 years? And so when we leave here today and we think past November, that we not wait until the next August of 2020 to begin thinking about what we're going to do. As my good friend Kay Monk Morgan said, I am with Kansas Action for Children. And for nearly 40 years, we've served as an independent voice for Kansas kids, advocating in the areas of health, economic, and education policy. Just to put it bluntly, we hustle to make good things happen for kids and families in this state. We don't receive any state or federal dollars, which is what enables us to be that independent voice. We are registered lobbyists, although I hope Davis not the dirty kind. And we're there because kids don't have a voice in the State House. They're not voting, and they're counting on others to advocate on those issues for them. And I brought John Wilson with me today. He joined our team a year ago after serving 2.5 terms in the legislature as a member of the Kansas House of Representatives, and he also worked for a decade for a national organization on children's health and obesity. He stepped down after ending the Brownback tax experiment to join our team. Thank you. John, after I talk, will share a little bit about what's on the line for Kansas kids, but I'm going to start by contextualizing sort of where we are today, offering some history, anchoring us in that. You heard Davis talk about the experiment. We don't need to look at all the headlines. We lived it. It's how some of us came to this work. But one of the things I do want to sort of go back to is I think it's convenient, and I think that it is maybe not entirely accurate that it wasn't known what was going to happen. It was absolutely known what was going to happen. The idea of passing that extreme tax experiment was to starve government. It was to take away from schools and roads and all the things that working Kansas families, low-income families, black and brown families, immigrant families, all the things that they need. That was by design. They may not have admitted to it in the beginning, and it may not have been that everybody was known and in on that little secret, but that bad idea has been around since Ronald Reagan's administration. Art Laffer wasn't new to the game, which underscores that bad ideas don't go away. Right? The dollars, as Davis said, will keep coming to recycle them, which is why it's incumbent upon us not to rest. It's not cycle to cycle, right? And almost 2 years ago, I stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., telling a national audience of people that Kansans had rejected extremism, that there was something to be celebrated in spite of what the rest of the country was reeling from and waking up to. They were waking up to the fresh hell, sorry, Sister Therese, wrought by an unhinged racist as our country's leader, and many of their states were lurching in an ideological direction that they had never experienced before. And so we started running little support groups at that particular meeting because we knew what it felt like. But in that moment where we had brushed rock bottom, we were fiercely bouncing back. Despite the stronghold of that extremist agenda that controlled the governor's office, both chambers of the legislature, as Davis shared with us, we were roaring back and sending nearly a third of the legislature, newly elected, to take down that extremist agenda. They felt that they had the mandate to do that, some of whom are in this room today. If you came into office in 2016 to take down the Brownback agenda, can you please stand? I also saw Representative Bishop somewhere around here, too. She left to leave Anita standing by herself. I get it. And in that moment that I told that audience about our story, as they stood there in disbelief, trying to offer them some optimism, that if it can happen in Kansas, it can happen anywhere, I sensed that they were clinging tightly to all those late-night jokes that were made about our state during the first 6 years of the Brownback administration. That they were in disbelief that Kansas could be anything other than a cautionary tale that they could point to and say, well, at least we're not Kansas. Which you might imagine, as a native and lifelong Kansan, a very proud one of that, has caused a permanent chip on my shoulder. It's part of why I feel poked in the chest when people say we can't be something else. When we say things like, well, it'll look about the same in 2018, the ship will be about the same, and I say, I want a better ship. Our kids deserve better than this. So fast forward to June 6, 2017. I stood in the State House hugging then Representative John Wilson, nearly in tears, because we had realized the first step of the plan, toppling a failed tax experiment. The power of that day is so strong, I think as you can hear in my voice, that I stand here talking about it, I'm instantly transported back, and I can immediately conjure up all the emotions. I get goosebumps, I start to get slightly choked up, I feel pride and I feel relief. This is what it looks like. We have money coming into the state again because we righted the ship. Where that line goes up, that reflects the courage of a body of lawmakers, Democrats and moderate Republicans, who came together to end the failed tax experiment, not once, but then came back and overrode the governor's veto. And I understood the enormity of what had just happened. I knew the years-long battle that we had all waged together. How many times were we out on the road talking to your chapters and your communities, that tall, gentle giant of a budget genius, Dwayne Gosen and myself and others, and you all were connecting to what was happening. You were hearing the voices of Game On and others. You were hearing from teachers in your school district. I think about the walkouts that have been happening in Arizona and Oklahoma and West Virginia, and I think about where we were before that. We were already on that path. We were realizing some of these things, and we were doing that. We were out hustling that dollar that Davis talked about. That's why I'm convinced that we can do this again, because we've shown it. We've shown that when we engage people, that when we connect, when we gather together, that it doesn't matter how much money flows in, it doesn't matter how many postcards come. And we can't forget that power that we have. The story that we told ourselves was that bottom line of the Coke slide that Steve shared. That will never outwork me, and I know it will never outwork you. I know that the extremist agenda will continue to be backed by those dollars, continue to back candidates who don't care about kids or families or paved roads or fixed income seniors, our public schools, or just Kansas writ large. That will not go away. The status quo and extremism will not go away. It has time on its hands. What it doesn't have is this passion. What it doesn't have are these people. That I'm confident of. But I want to be sure that we've not lost sight of what is left to do, because I think that we all stepped back and felt relief on June 6, 2017. I think we felt like we had toppled something significant, and we had, but as I said before, that was the first step. Our return to that place of pragmatism was the beginning of what we know is going to be a long, long road to recovery. And to make sure we don't lose sight of the work that we have left to do, Governor Brownback and his allies were begging, borrowing, and stealing their way through that failed tax experiment. A structurally balanced state bank account will happen when we stop transferring from the highway fund, when we stop sweeping accounts. And y'all, the slide before where it showed the steep uptick in revenue, that includes a transfer from the highway fund still this year. We're not balanced yet. We still have work to do. We have eye-popping credit card debt. The amount of bills the governor and his allies put on the credit card will blow your mind, and it's greater than what we had to do during the Great Recession. This is a long game. One I know that we can get through, but one that we will have to stay vigilant for. That budget is better, yes, but we have understaffed prisons, we've canceled highway projects, we have an overwhelmed child welfare system. Children are dying because we don't have a place to put them. They're sleeping on couches, they're sleeping in offices. That is not the Kansas that I was raised in. We know better than that, and we can do better than that. We zeroed out all of our accounts and raided the piggy bank. We ended that failed tax plan, and we left something in the checkbook this year, but that's with the highway transfers I mentioned, and it's still not what's required by state law. We need to make certain that we've got reserves in the bank, because when that next economic downturn comes, whether it's a capital G, capital R, Great Recession, or something smaller, we better be able to weather that, and not weather that by increasing sales taxes and balancing on the backs of kids and low-income folks and vulnerable populations. We need to weather what might come next because we've prepared for it, like fiscally responsible people. Or we want to prepare for it because there's opportunities that we can seize. For nearly 5 years now, we have left hundreds of millions of our tax dollars on the table every year while clinging to extremism and denying access to health care for working Kansans. This never made sense then, whether from the perspective of the state's bottom line or the well-being of our neighbors. These are things that we can realize if we say no more extremism in Kansas. And it left our budget upended, and it also decimated our tax code. We have the second highest sales tax on food in the country. There is no reason for that. And that's not the only thing. We lost tax credits for fixed income seniors, for low-income families. We have no child care credit. We can do better than this. And all of that together, to be certain, is a long road. It cannot all happen at the same time. It will take thoughtful discussions. It will take strong leadership. I worry, though. I worry because I think and I fear that we have become fixated and fatigued by what's taking place at the nation's capital. When we spend so much time catching that swirl or what was tweeted by that unhinged racist leader that is in office. I'm worried because we lost key champions in the August primary. Kansans who stood tall in the face of bigotry, who voted against hateful legislation that targeted LGBT community, who voted for prioritizing in little kids. Davis talked about politicians knowing who to listen to based on the money they received to support their campaign. And here's the thing. Anita Judd Jenkins didn't take votes based on who may have contributed or the risk that it may have caused in August 2018. Anita Judd Jenkins took votes to fix the problem. And Anita Judd Jenkins did not make it through the August primary, and that's where I feel some sense of responsibility. Because if we are to get behind the change, we must show up for those people taking the risks all the time, not just once a year. That means the work that we have to do in communities does not stop. It's Anita Judd Jenkins, it's Mary Martha Good, it's Joy Costin. And as I said before, while the numbers may play it about the same, I don't want the same ship. I want a better ship, and I want them on it with us. Because I know they're proven to make the right choices, to make the choices that benefit all of their constituents. That's how we get to a better Kansas. Sorry, the passion, it overwhelms me sometimes. And I'm worried because as John and I attend events around the state, we're seeing smaller and smaller audiences. It is not lost on me that in 2014, this room was 2 or 3 times this size. How do we pull people back into the conversation? Civic engagement is year-round. It must be everybody. We cannot lose that momentum. Just 1 year ago, after that historic vote on June 6, 2017, the Director for Americans for Prosperity said, Kansas voters are not going to be happy when they realize their income taxes were raised in historic fashion and done so retroactively. It's betting, he is betting, they are betting that we will return to being lulled back into complacency, that we will lose our relentless drive, that we will not stay actively engaged and fight back, that folks like Davis, who found our state and frequently tells me how much he loves Kansas, how he's adopted as his home, that we'll lose folks like that because they'll believe that we can't turn it around, and I know that we can. Before I turn it over to John to talk about what's on the line for Kansas kids, I want to go back to that stage I told you about in DC 2 years ago. After the 2016 elections, I told them that extremists laying claim to my state had lit a fire within me and that I was determined and driven, that I wasn't about to let them destroy my state on my watch. And I feel today, after the August primaries, like I've been poked in the chest by boastful extremism that's betting that we can't keep this going, that we can't reclaim our states. They don't believe that we have it in us to fight back. We have exactly 67 days to show them that we weren't interested in extremism in 2016, and we certainly aren't up for it in 2018, and we will not turn our state back over to that hate-filled agenda. Please help me in welcoming John Wilson, KHSA's Vice President.
Folks, I get to work with her every day. I wonder if you all are able, I'd love to have you stand for a second and join me in an activity, if you're able to. A little bit of a centering activity as we move into this next topic. I'd like you to close your eyes with me, and I would like you to think of a child in your life that you just absolutely love, a child that you would do anything for. And if you can't pick a child because there's too many in your life, think of all of them. I'll tell you, I'm thinking of my two boys, Parker and Henry. Parker's 6 and Henry will be 2 in a couple of weeks. Think about those children for just a few seconds. Okay, keep that child or those children in your mind. You can have a seat, and I want you to, we'll come back to those children at the end of my comments. Ready for the slides? That's the correct one. We're getting there. There we are. Next year, if the trend continues, we can expect about 36,000 babies to be born in Kansas. And thanks to decades of research, we know what to provide for each one of these babies so that their social, their emotional, health, and educational needs are met. It's actually pretty straightforward. They're going to need stable and responsive relationships, nurturing places and experiences, suitable nutrition, and access to health care. This is their foundation for a lifetime of health and opportunity. We're going to keep going with it. We're going to get back to it. There we are. So we know what they need. We also know actually how to make this happen, and there are lots of ways, some of which Kansas is already doing. Child care assistants can provide access to affordable, high-quality early care and learning for these kids. Parents as teachers and other home visiting services equip parents and caregivers with the skills and knowledge they need to raise their children. CanCare and the Children's Health Insurance Program provide affordable health insurance to these families. Cash assistance, or the Earned Income Tax Credit, help provide financial stabilities to these families. And nutrition assistance programs like SNAP can help families put food on the table. These policies and programs are among the many ingredients in the recipe for a child's success. And by the way, these policies and programs are made possible through investments by the legislature, by our state government. We know that what these 36,000 babies will need, and we know how to meet those needs through those programs and through those services. And I think most importantly, we know when all of this needs to happen. During the first 5 years of a child's life, the brain is at its most flexible state, making this a critical period for learning and growth. And that's why this upcoming election is so important. For those 36,000 babies born next year in Kansas that I just mentioned, their first 4 years will also be the first 4 years of the first term of our next governor. That person and their administration will play a huge role in shaping the lives of tens of thousands of Kansas children. If we have a governor who understands and embraces these principles, then the future looks bright. And not just for these babies, but actually for our state. Let's see what the research says about this. Early childhood education reduces grade retention and is shown to save school systems money for K-12 education. Participants in high-quality early education also show long-term gains in the form of lower rates of incarceration, lower rates of arrest in violent crimes, and are less likely to receive government assistance. Parents with children participating in high-quality early education saw sustained wage growth. Participants in high-quality early learning also showed long-term health benefits, including reduced depression, rates of smoking, and rates of substance abuse. Better health outcomes resulting from birth to 5 early childhood education lead to lower rates of chronic disease, lower healthcare costs, and contribute to a 13% return on investment. Pretty good stuff. Folks, the positive effects of early childhood interventions are evident even 30 years into the future. With a governor who understands this stuff, understands these principles, and understands these values and shares them, and with a governor who crafts a budget that prioritizes kids and families, the potential for these kids and for our states is almost limitless. But what happens if our next governor doesn't believe any of this? Right? What happens to these babies if our next governor thinks that we're already spending too much on kids and their families? What happens if our next governor chooses to ignore the needs of certain kinds of kids and their families? What happens if our next governor doubles down on the political extremism that guided the previous administration? Annie just shared a glimpse of what could happen, actually. Think about the lifelong health and economic costs that exist for the kids whose developing years were negatively shaped by the extreme agenda pushed over the last 8 years. Those costs will be borne by all of us, not just those kids. This is what worries Annie. This is what keeps me up at night. This is why the team at Kansas Action for Children has cleared our calendars this fall to make sure that every child in Kansas can reach their full potential under the next administration. And when I say every child, I mean every single child. Black, brown, white, Asian, doesn't matter, every single child under the next administration. And I got to tell you, we cannot do it alone. We need you to bring everything that you've got this fall. We need you to get informed. We need you to ask questions to every candidate that you meet. Ask them what their plan is for kids and families under their administration or when they step foot in the legislature. And once you have that information, you share that information on social media. You share it at church. You share it at PTA meetings, at Rotary meetings, over the dinner table, at neighborhood potlucks, wherever it is, you've got to share that information. Tell other folks what you've heard that candidates are going to be doing for kids and families in this state. And then, when you've asked all the questions and you've shared all that information, you got to go out and vote on November 6th. As Annie mentioned, just 67 days from now. We mentioned that there is a lot on the line for Kansas kids in the upcoming election. And what that really means is there's a lot on the line for the future of the state of Kansas. I want you to go back to that child or those children you were thinking of when I started my comments. As you think about them, think about the fact that the moment that you are not ready to do for other kids in this state what you would do for that child or those children that you're thinking of is the moment you're not ready to do whatever it takes for them. We need to treat every child in this state as if they are our own, and we need to work our tails off between now and the election to ensure that there is a governor that supports every single child. Thank you very much.